Welcome back, everyone. We're doing another episode of Indie Reads Aloud. I love bringing this program to you because it means that I get to discover new books and new authors right along with you. Today, Erica Miner is here, and she is all the way from the Seattle area in Washington. But she's a Detroit native, so this is super fun for me because we're doing this in reverse because I was born in Seattle. So it's kind of like a Kismet in backward version. Welcome, Erica. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Diana. I've been so excited about appearing with you and talking about my book and reading
The
from it.
reading part is my fun. That's what makes it so much fun for me. I don't know if you heard in some of the episodes you listened to, but I'm just a recovering 6-year-old, and I like it when people read out loud to me. So that's why I started this program. Tell
Perfect.
us a little bit about you and your writing journey.
It actually started, I was a violinist with the Metropolitan for Opera for 21 years,
That's
but I
so
started
fascinating.
writing, yeah, there's a lot of stories there, but I
I'm
started
sure.
actually writing before I even started playing the violin. When I was growing up in Detroit, there was a great public school system with some wonderful after-school programs. And when I was about 7 or 8, I was placed in one of those programs for creative writing. I'm not sure why. Some teacher must have seen a spark of that in me. And I don't remember what I wrote because it was like 100 years ago. But what I do remember is loving the whole process of creating characters and plots and weaving them together to tell stories. I discovered I love telling stories. And well, as you probably can tell, I still do. But shortly after that, I started playing the violin. And as you know, have your son having studied violin, it
Right.
tends to be all consuming. So the writing kind of took second place to the violining, but I never stopped writing. I kept writing all the way through high school. And even when I was at the Met, I took writing classes whenever I could fit them into my schedule so that when I
Extraordinary.
retired, after 21 years, um, I knew that my creative outlet was going to be to go back to my writing, and I've been writing ever since.
I think that's so fascinating that you get to live in such a creative world. I think it's a wonderful thing. So tell me, I haven't asked this question of authors in quite a while, so I guess I'm kind of overdue. Are you a plotter or are you a pantser?
Oh,
Do
definitely a
you?
plotter.
Excellent. So you write with
Oh,
an
definitely.
outline and you plan your things ahead.
Well, when you're a musician, you have to be very disciplined. And I took that discipline and kind of sent it out to my writing muse, and it came back as yes, I have to write detailed outlines before I begin to write the actual story. So yeah, I'm definitely kind of obsessive that way.
I think that's wonderful. In my world, we call it passionate plotter. I run into so many of the authors in my circles, will tell you I'm a little obsessive about that, but I write several projects simultaneously, so having that outlining process is really critical for me. Um, but we're constantly ribbing each other for who's a plotter and who's a pantser, and it's great fun. But yeah, I'm always excited when I get to meet another plotter because there are so few of them in my world right now.
Yeah, I totally get that. And I feel the same.
So, the book you're going to read from today is Overture to Murder, and this is book 3 in the Julia Kogan Opera Mystery series. I loved when I first connected with you. I love this idea of murder mystery thriller connected to the musical opera environment. I was raised as an opera kid, so I definitely appreciate opera. Um, the idea of mixing murder with mystery and operas, it just seems a natural fit because so many of the operas out there have some little untowardness about them. Were you cognizant of that connection, or did you just stumble upon writing about the opera and then just took it to its next level?
Well, no, it wasn't coincidental. Actually, there were a number of nefarious things going on at the Met while I was there that I kind of stored away in my writer's mind. And boy, do I have stories to tell. Well, a lot of it ended up in my books, but when certain other things happened, like one very prominent company member started getting death threats and other things going on, I just realized I, couldn't resist the idea of setting a murder mystery at the Met. I mean, when you think about it, it seems to me that there's not just a few, but many, many operas that have murders in them,
Sure.
including the one in this book. So I just applied that to the idea of writing a murder mystery. And I thought, well, at the very least, I can kill off all the people who made my life miserable,
I love that. That's great.
and, the detestable divas and the snarky stagehands and my orchestra colleagues. So it all came together when the ideas started really taking hold in my wicked imagination. And the next thing I knew, I was writing the first book in this series, which takes place at the Met.
I think it's spectacular. I'm so excited to hear repeats of this. This just sounds lovely. I know we're jumping into book 3, so why don't you give us a little preface about what you're going to read, and then when you're ready, you may take the microphone and read aloud.
Well, it's a 3-book series so far, and the first book takes place at the Met. And the protagonist, who is Julia Kogan, she's a very young, very gifted violinist, but somewhat naive. And she ends up getting into a lot of trouble when she starts looking into a murder investigation. So in the first book, she ends up being the target of a killer, but she's smart enough to, spoiler alert, save her own life. And in the second book, she goes to a different opera company, which is Santa Fe, which is a whole different thing because she's a fish out of water, New York City gal in the middle of the
Mm,
desert.
right.
And
Yeah.
but she always manages to get into trouble and saves the day for herself. But in the third book, Overture to Murder, uh, she goes to San Francisco Opera, which for me has a lot of connotations. I have relatives and friends who have worked there, and I have a deep connection to the place. So I thought it the perfect opera house to set the next book. And in this book, Julia goes to San Francisco and is taking the place of the concertmaster. The concertmaster is the first of the first violinists, the most important violinist in the orchestra. Um, I describe the story as a suspicious hit and run, a backstage murder, and a violinist who won't quit sleuthing. So by the time of the third book, she's no longer naive. She's a really pretty savvy amateur sleuth. So in this book, Overture to Murder, the curtain comes down on murder as she heads to San Francisco to replace the concertmaster, Ben, who has been seriously injured in a hit and run accident. But Julia, of course, having been involved in murder investigations, suspects it's no accident. And then one prominent company member becomes a victim of a grisly murder, and she again becomes involved in the investigation. So again, she finds danger lurking everywhere in the dark hallways and the back stairways of these opera houses. This one is by far the oldest of the 3 so far and the creepiest for sure. And you can find all that description in the book. And
I love
again,
creepy. Creepy is good. Creepy in an theater of any variety is especially good.
well, when I was in San Francisco researching the book, because I knew so many people there, I was given a tour of the entire opera house from top to bottom. And let me tell you, you'll read it in the book. It's pretty creepy in some of those places.
That's
So
fantastic.
yeah, so it makes a great background for this particular mystery. But this time, not only is she face to face with a killer, but her courage is really put to the test when the life of a precious family member is also in peril.
Okay.
So that,
Wow, there's a lot to digest in that. I'm looking forward to hearing the reading. When you are ready, the microphone is yours.
okay, let me just take a sip of water
Sure.
and we'll begin. Prologue. Stanford University, Palo Alto, California, 1922. Beyond the vastness of a newly constructed Northern California University Stadium pulsating with opera music, the Bay Area fog hovered in the night air above the hills far off to the west. Overhead, a silver half moon hung in the sky, unobstructed by clouds and uninterrupted by wind, a realm unto itself, The magical opera wonderland existed as if in its own universe, without intervention from any worldly reality. The audience of thousands, their hearts wrenched by the plaintive tones of an anguished, long-suffering clown, the famous Pagliaccio, sat mesmerized as streaks of mist began to obscure the moon's eerie light. In a remote corner of the stadium, a lone figure lingered in the shadows, contemplating, considering, and waiting. Chapter 1. San Francisco, California, present day. They were crossing the street now. He could see them, so involved in their opera talk they weren't paying attention. Good. Everyone knew the corner of Franklin and McAllister, the nearest main crossing to the stage door of San Francisco's War Memorial Opera House, was one of the busiest in the entire Civic Center district. At twilight, when people were leaving work, once the gilded California light began to wane, it was hard to see where one was going or to perceive what and who might be in the immediate vicinity. Performers from the opera could not avoid crossing that intersection multiple times, day and night. Accidents, pedestrian and otherwise, did occur there. They weren't common, but common enough. With the driver's seat window open, he could hear fragments of their conversation. How he despised that voice of an operatic tenor who was so arrogant, so full of himself, that he strode about the stage as if he owned it, that he looked down on anyone who wasn't an opera star like himself. Me, especially. Andres, the tenor, spoke as he sang, as if telling the world that he, Andres, was the god's gift to opera. The singer strutted around, owning, claiming the San Francisco opera stage and every other opera stage in the world for himself, especially when it came to the massive works of the legendary 19th century operatic giant, Richard Wagner. That swine Andres doesn't deserve to be a star. Maestro Merola, our sainted founder, never would have put up with such egregious affectation. But Maestro Merola had been taken from the company much too soon. The maestro was a saint who didn't deserve to die before his time. He wiped away a tear. Then, remembering the afternoon's rehearsal, he clenched his teeth. The repulsive behavior Andres exhibited that day proved he had not changed one whit since his previous engagement with the company years ago, arguing with the stage director, with the conductor, as if he existed in some lofty echelon miles above everyone else, in some kind of Valhalla, the mythical warrior's heaven where the Norse gods live, of his own making. That bastard. The world will be a better place without him. He could see Andres and Ben were only halfway across the intersection. Perfect. Their light turned red and his turned green. It was time. Bearing down on the accelerator, he hugged the right lane, trying to aim for Andres without hitting Ben. He had no gripe with Ben, but if he became collateral damage, well, peccato. It would be a shame. But sometimes sacrifices must be made for the greater good, getting rid of Andres once and for all. The impact was swift and hard. He felt the thud of metal striking skin and muscle and bone. He didn't look back or sideways, but raced through the intersection, weaving through cars, precipitously turning left at Turk Street, then right on Octavia to get out of the sightline of onlookers and other vehicles. Bristling with tension, he wiped one clammy palm, then the other on his jacket, and glanced around. No one seemed to be following him, and traffic ahead was light, as he had hoped. He could slow down and act normal. He was home free. Would the accident be featured on KTVU Evening News? In the San Francisco Chronicle headlines tomorrow morning? He relished the thought that when he returned to the Opera House the next day, voices would be buzzing with theories about who could have wanted to harm Andres Agro, the great Wagnerian tenor. Who, indeed? Chapter 2. Julia was beginning to wonder if teaching Rebecca to play the violin was a more loaded situation than she had bargained for. There were plenty of able violin teachers back in New York City she could have enlisted instead of struggling with the whims of her own disarmingly bright 5-year-old daughter's temperament. There was no doubt that Rebecca was a born artist. She played violin and piano, sang exactly on pitch, and wrote both music and poetry. But the precocious child argued with every instruction, every suggestion that Julia proposed to, or, in Rebecca's mind, foisted upon her. Remember, Rebecca, your strings have to be in tune. Now tell me, what are their names? G is for no, D is for Diagon, A is for Avenger, and E is for Elf. But I think I like D for Dragon better. Good job. Julia smiled at the literary and fantasy references her daughter chose to represent the letters naming the violin strings. The kid was a pushover for anything having to do with Avengers, Transformers, Guardians of the Galaxy, Harry Potter, fairies, or wizardry. But Julia, who would soon be playing Wagner's famously mythical opera cycle, The Ring of the Nibelung, at San Francisco Opera, approved of Rebecca's prescient choice. After all, the ring contained many of the same characters Rebecca knew and loved. When Rebecca was a toddler and wanted attention, it was tough for Julia to practice violin, so she would have Rebecca make up stories about the music. That tactic had served them both well. And if the strings are not tuned, they're misbehaved. Then your scales will be out of tune, and we wouldn't want that, right? Mama, why do I have to practice scales? I hate them. Julia sighed. She had never wanted to practice scales when her father, Saul, first started teaching her the violin. But she was eager to teach Rebecca the exquisite operatic melodies that filled her own mind and heart. Because, dearest, if you want to play beautiful music, you need to know where your fingers are supposed to go. Scales teach you that. Beautiful music like you play in the opera? Yes, and much, much more. Julia felt ready to tackle the complexities of Wagner's mythical ring at San Francisco Opera. But despite the parallels to those characters Rebecca was passionate about, Julia had concerns about exposing her gifted child to the ring, which was filled with sophisticated ideas about violence, deceit, incest, and murder. Larry, Julia's partner and father of Rebecca, thought otherwise. To Julia, it seemed both ironic and obvious that this particular battle with him had undeniable similarities to the conflicts between the husband and wife duo of Wotan and Fricka, the head Wagnerian gods, in the ring. Mama, tell me again why we came here. Because Ben hurt himself and can't play violin for a while, and they asked me to replace him. And Uncle Alex was looking for someone to house sit his apartment here in Haight-Ashbury while he's away on a photography shoot for the summer. The ring was always a major event for any company. Julie had played it at the Met and seemed the logical choice to step in at the last moment when San Francisco Opera concertmaster Ben Masterson had been severely injured in a hit-and-run accident. Thus, Julia became the company's newest Wagnerian warrior. She hadn't visited San Francisco since she was a small child, but from the little she remembered, it was the kind of city she was keen for her young daughter. The pieces seemed to fall in place after she had heard that San Franciscans considered their opera only slightly less sacred than the Holy Grail. Now, Becca, will you play me your 8-note G major scale on the G and D strings? The child grumbled, picked up her minuscule violin, and started to play. Julia watched and listened. No matter how simple the tune, Rebecca always looked like she was playing something much more complicated and always played perfectly in pitch. Julia looked over to see Larry standing by the bedroom door, beaming. Julia flashed him a "Don't let Rebecca see you" look. He nodded and put his fingers to his lips. Julia loved that Larry, after retiring from 20 years' service as a detective with the New York Police Department, had taken to being a stay-at-home dad like a trooper. Their mixed genes had created a striking-looking child, with her dark eyes and burnished brown hair. Rebecca resembled an Italian Renaissance painter's rendering of a half-Jewish, half-Italian angel. Am I done with scales now, Mama? Yes, my darling. Now you can play the Ode to Joy. Rebecca stamped her foot. I don't want to play that. It's boring. It's Beethoven. It doesn't get greater. Julia heaved a sigh. Just play. I know you can do it. The tears streaming down Rebecca's face stopped short of her quarter-sized violin. Julia felt pangs of guilt as she remembered her father's insisting she also play great music, like the intermezzo from Mascagni's opera Cavalleria Rusticana. She had been too young to understand his rationale and, just like Rebecca, had ended up bathed in tears. Okay, sweetie, that's enough for today. Next time, I promise to play a song with you. Julia wiped Rebecca's tears and removed the violin, elfin in comparison to her own full-sized instrument, from under her daughter's chin. Then she glanced out the high-ceilinged bay windows that framed the large front room of the apartment, a gorgeous California day. Why don't you go to the park with Daddy? Yay! Larry and Rebecca frequented the nearby Panhandle, exploring its grassy fields and paths that led to Golden Gate Park, sometimes walking all the way to the Land's End Trail. Julia considered Golden Gate the closest thing to Manhattan Central Park, in some ways better, since it ended up at the ocean's edge, with its dramatic cliffs and white peaked waves. Julia placed Rebecca's miniature violin and bow in their case. Soon the child would be using regular-sized ones if she decided to stick with her studies. I wish I could go with you guys, Larry, but I know you have to practice. Larry strode into the room, kissed Julia's cheek, and took Rebecca by the hand. Then he whispered in Julia's ear, "It's not easy being the child of a great musician." Julia smiled. Larry could be so perceptive when he wanted to be. She took out her own violin and bow, opened the music to Wagner's Das Rheingold on her music stand, and started practicing the solos. As concertmaster, the first and most important violin in the orchestra, she had the huge responsibility of leading the entire orchestra in the greatest operatic cycle ever written, one of the most challenging works in the entire repertoire. She would have to be content with that noble pursuit for the time being. But Julia was not prepared for what happened in the first rehearsal. "Isabella, it is a disaster!" The director, Gilles Chauvet, screamed through his mic to the conductor. "The orchestra, it is either lagging behind or rushing ahead of the singers. C'est pas possible. It is her fault, the concertmaster. She is severely lacking in leadership. She is sabotaging me, making my job very difficile." Chauvet's piercing tone reached Julia's ears, and, she feared, those of the rest of the present company. She felt a wave of shock come over her, an intense stab of panic in her chest. She would not have anticipated a stage director invading the orchestra's domain, not to mention that of its lead violinist, in such a rude manner. "My dear Eve," said the general manager, Felicia, "I have never witnessed a stage director complain about an orchestra member, particularly the concertmaster, without cause, and certainly not in front of the whole company. It is unheard of. Please desist immediately. Do I make myself clear?" "Felicia is right, Monsieur Chauvet," Isabella added. "It's not within a stage director's purview to complain about a musician. It's an outrage and, frankly, an insult." "Then I refuse to direct this company any further." Red-faced and scowling, Chauvet stormed out. Aghast, Julia turned to her stand partner, Nerissa. "What have I done to provoke such vitriol?" "Nothing, Julia. He's probably looking for someone new to the job he can take advantage of. That would seem to be you. Don't take it personally. It's hard not to. I understand. But if there's any sabotage going on, it's coming from Chauvet. Just ignore him and keep doing what you're doing. I'll bet he won't even show for the rest of the rehearsal. He tends to pout in his dressing room after these tantrums." Sure enough, Chauvet didn't return after the break was over. Julia heard whispering among the other musicians that he was spending the time sulking behind the door of his inner sanctum. It was a stunt many of the company's most seasoned members had seen him act out before, which only escalated their resentment toward him. When Chauvet's assistant, Pierre Henri, took charge, however, peace and calm were restored. Alberic pronounced his curse, and the gods crossed the Rainbow Bridge, entering Valhalla without a hitch. He had watched with impotent rage from the shadowy recesses of the theater as Eve attacked the pretty young concertmaster. "This opera house is falling apart. If only I were in charge." He would never allow self-important, arrogant bastards like Andres and Chauvet to sully the reputation of his beloved company, never mind verbally assail an esteemed musician from the most prestigious company in the country, the Metropolitan Opera. If I were running this company, I would not tolerate such behavior. I would recognize and acknowledge the brilliance of this young violinist's execution of her job, not lambast her with insult and invective. It's unconscionable. I will do something.
Very
And
well done. Thank you so much. I'm super intrigued. As a thespian of many years, this book combines a whole bunch of wonderful moments for me, backstage banter, directors with their attitudes, the
it's
orchestra all working in kind of, I think it's a great way to tell a story. And I'm super excited to read this one, but I'm also excited about the other two that come before it. Are
would you like to
these standalone books, or do they need to be read in order?
I think any of them can be a standalone because each one takes place at a different opera house with a different environment surrounding it. So
Excellent.
it's always nice to start with the first one, but I try to sprinkle in little bits of what happened in previous books in every one of them so that you'll get a sense of who Julia is. So I would say it's definitely great either way.
Okay. And do you have a favorite subplot character, a favorite sidekick character? I know Julie is your focus, but is there somebody who plays a smaller role that you really enjoy that we might be able to alert your readers to?
Absolutely. I really enjoyed writing about her best friend and roommate, Katie, who's also a violinist. But Julie is very committed and very determined, and she's serious about her art. Katie also is, but she's kind of a free spirit, and so she and Katie and Julia bounce things off of each other. And when Julia's being too serious, Katie tries to kind of rein that in, and when Katie's being too carefree and offhand about things, then Julia tries to rein her in. So they really do make quite, in ways, an odd couple, but in ways just perfect for each other. And they have a whole backstory, which you can find out about in the first book.
Oh, lovely. What's next for you? What are you working on now?
Well, my characters are telling me, excuse me, what kind of trouble they want to get to in the next book. And
Okay.
my publisher's been asking me about, when we can start thinking about book four. Um, and it's kind of open at the moment. We haven't decided if it's going to be book four or whether I can do something a little bit different. Like, for instance, my publisher loves true crime stories and murder stories that take place in history. And the history of opera goes back 400 years. So I can only imagine how many murders have taken place off stage in those
Oh,
atmospheres.
sure.
I could definitely go down some rabbit holes researching that. So
Well,
I
and
kind
any theater worth their weight will have a well-used ghost lamp. So there's lots of
yes.
opportunity for story there.
Funny you should mention that, because there's a lot about that in Overture to Murder. They do that. The house manager gave me this wonderful tour, and he also mentioned, he said, we always have a ghost light on at the end of the night to make sure that the spirits are happy. We don't
Yes.
want any of them interfering with the performances. So yeah, definitely. I'm so glad you really do know your theater.
Yeah, I spent many years working in the theater, and I have spent time in some theaters where the ghost lamp is absolutely a requirement because things happen and you can't always explain them. So it's important to keep that light on for them at night.
For sure, for sure. And it was a lot of fun writing about that too.
Well, we look forward to having you back on the program. Maybe you'll come back and read from the other two books for us.
I would love to do that. What a great idea. I have so much fun. As you can tell, I'm kind of a frustrated actor in my own way, and I just love to do these readings. So ask me back and I'll be right there.
You can come back anytime you like for as many books as you write. I would love to have you
Yay.
back. Thank you
Thank you
again
so much.
so much, Erica, for coming on the program, and I look forward to your next reading.
Well, thank you. And I'm just delighted to be here, and I look forward to my next reading as well.
Thank you. Have a great day.
And you.